next part of the event is the moderated panel discussion that I'm going to moderate. So let's first start with some introductions.
Hi, everyone that I haven't met yet. Sarah Thwaite joining you from Atlanta, Georgia. I am a senior field marketing manager at Anaplan. If you're not familiar with Anaplan, we are a connected planning cloud platform. So essentially leveraged for planning, budgeting, and forecasting across all of the different functions within an organization. I've been with the company for a little over 3 years, and I've been working with BDI very closely. We've done several events with them in person as well as now virtually. So excited to be here with all of you today.
Thank you, Sarah. Melissa.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Melissa Centrella, and I lead a team that we call Global Campaigns, which is kind of a hybrid between demand gen and field marketing. I'm with a company called Monotype, and Monotype is the largest font foundry in the world. We help enterprise companies and agencies with what we call brand expression, with their branding, particularly with a focus on type.
My name is Samantha Stone. I'm the founder of the Marketing Advisory Network, and we work with lots of different organizations and have run tons of virtual experiences over this last year, but even prior, as well as ABM programs. So really excited to be here today to chat with all of you.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm the head of growth marketing at Quartzy, which is a lab productivity software.
Good afternoon, Dane Harris, ringing in from Dallas, Texas. I am the EVP for strategy and growth for my company, Roboyo. We do intelligent automation services, which means we convert the manual redundant tasks and activities that people do as their process careers, and we automate those with a bot.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dane. All right, so let's kick off, which is really the topic of this event. What are the main advantages of virtual to you and your organization? We can just sort of go through the entire panel with this particular question, starting with Sarah T.
All right, great. Well, I know we've talked through some of these already in our initial polling, but I think that there have been several silver linings pivoting to virtual events. I know some of you had thrown out there, we're no longer constrained geographically, so our programs can have a much broader reach. Folks aren't having to get T&E approval, and they aren't having to factor in travel plans in order to attend, which we know can sometimes be really difficult. I also think that we've been able to have greater access to senior leaders, including C-suite executives, because again, they aren't having to travel. And as we all know, they're typically traveling, whether it's nationally or globally, and it can be difficult sometimes to get them to attend some of our events because they're usually involved in more sales meetings. And so I think that's been fantastic. And then also one of the things that I always remind my sales teams is that this has really given us a chance to learn about what motivates people personally as well as professionally. So we have a really rare, unique opportunity to get a glimpse into people's private lives. And I always say, without being creepy, you can use that information in a variety of ways as part of your follow-up strategy to help your messaging resonate on a personal level as you build a professional relationship.
All good stuff. Thank you, Sarah. Melissa.
I agree with so many of those points. And, when I was thinking about this, it was interesting to think back to last March, and I just remember all these brainstorming meetings with my team about virtual events. And I'm sure you all remember looking like deer in the headlights, all of us just looking at each other going, oh my God, what are we going to do? So I think what we came out of that was, we're going to test and we're going to fail and we're going to learn. And that, I think, I preface with that because what my learnings are, what worked for me may not be what works for everybody. So I think there is a lot to be said for trying different things. Other than, the regional aspect and reaching VIPs, I'll add to what Sarah said in that we've also found that it's been a lot easier for us to get really quality content to present. So getting presenters on our own events has always been really a challenge for us, and to be able to kind of get our customers to deliver case studies or to get some of our influencers in branding to present has really been a lot easier. So I feel like the quality of our events has gone up a little bit too.
Thank you for pointing that out. It absolutely is easier to get customer speakers, or just speakers in general, right? There's less friction, no travel,
right.
Doesn't take up a lot of time. Really good point for sure.
I don't have to actually put nice pants on. I can,
Pop is lovely.
Yeah.
Samantha Stone.
Comfy pants is like the number one benefit to me too. I totally agree. You know, I think a little bit of, I think Sarah had touched on this as well. We've had an interesting opportunity to create intimacy with our audience and with senior level audiences that we've never really had before. I love dinners and I love great restaurants as much as anyone, but being invited into somebody's home creates a whole different avenue of relationship. And so we've had really good success with a number of events that are around sort of a skill, right, or something. Oftentimes we're inviting somebody into our home, so we bring a +1 along, right, or offer that extension. And so it's been a really good way to get to know the folks in there. And I'll just give you this little anecdote from one of the BDI panel events we actually a client of mine did together. And it was, I think, the perfect example of what comes from this kind of intimacy. So one of the people who was in the session with us worked for the M&Ms. I don't actually know the name of the company, but it's the M&M company. And they had talked about launching personalized M&Ms. And we had all gotten a chuckle out of it. And it was, you know, related to the conversation we were having. Well, all of a sudden, what are we going to send everybody after? We're going to send them personalized M&Ms afterwards, right? Because everybody had gotten a giggle and we're liking and talking. So it gives us a chance to be really personal in our relationships with folks and really engaged. A couple other things I'll just mention. I think the virtual events also allow us to repurpose content more easily than physical events, because you're not recording dinner. That's weird, right? That doesn't feel good. So you have to rely on sort of written. Also, if you are going to an audience that has global presence or multi-language presence, it's a lot easier to do translation, live translation. There's lots of plugins to the platforms we use if you want to be able to do that. Somebody who speaks a different language or who needs signing or just has a hearing condition and likes to read, or just likes to learn through text. It gives you all kinds of options that in-person events don't have. And then the third thing that I would just say is that I've noticed a big time shift. So people aren't working like their normal business hours because a lot of them aren't going into the office. And these virtual events allow us to slide into times that might be unusual for them, right? That they might not attend something in person, but maybe I'm going to get on an evening, or maybe I wouldn't normally go away for lunch, but I'm home at my desk anyways, and I'm going to, you know, eat something quickly. So for me, these virtual experiences have actually had a lot of benefit to it. And I'll just, because I said that I wanted to hear things that didn't work well, I think when you get too big a group and it still feels like a broadcasts have a role, not, you know, they have a role to play. But we haven't had as much success with that as we have with these smaller, more intimate, more purposeful, shared interest kinds of forums.
Great stuff. Thank you, Samantha. Sarah S.
First of all, I am team sweatpants on the bottom.
Woohoo.
For all of those in the chat. My athleisure clothing has gone through the roof.
Exactly.
So I was trying to think of a couple of things that people hadn't mentioned. One being, like we said it a little bit, the time it would take for someone to come downtown to a city and park and sit and have lunch and blah, blah, blah. Like it's an entire day, if not half a day. So I think people are much more willing to do a quick hour in their sweatpants. And then I really like being able to invite my salespeople as a fly on the wall, because at usual in-person events, you can't have 20 salespeople there. A, it's expensive, B, they're annoying. So it's nice to be able to let them come and just be in listen-only mode. And I think, as Sarah said, like be able to understand what their customers are saying, and then be able to follow up with that really specifically. And then the third thing I would say is I know that my salespeople would complain when they were at events, oh, I only got to talk to the person right next to me. First of all, get up and move. Second of all, it's nicer, you can hear what everybody has to say in events like this, as opposed to just a couple people you were able to make that connection with.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Dane.
Build on what Sarah just said, and I think it's the targeted ability to curate the invitation list, getting people there that may have some credentials that speak to someone else. For example, if I just look at this panel, I see Sarah, Melissa, Samantha, and I say, hey, you know, based on their positions, what they do in their industries. I would like to be a part of this particular meeting as well. So I think sometimes that will encourage those that you want to come to a meeting to hear whatever it is that you want to present, added leverage and added value that they want to come. But just the ability to target exactly who you would like to be at a particular event is really good. And having others there that may be in their peer group only adds to perhaps their motivation to come.
Thank you, Dane. And thanks everyone. You really have listed so many advantages of virtual events. There's a lot of different directions to go from here. One thing I'd like to do, which was certainly covered in the Slido poll, which is how do virtual events support specifically your account-based marketing strategies? Dane, you were just getting at that. Some other panelists talked about that too. Other attendees mentioned in the Slido poll that there's no geographic boundaries. So from where we sit at BDI working with our clients, I think one of the greatest advantages of virtual events is to be able to pinpoint, like Dane just said, and others as well, on exactly the accounts and the contacts that you want to participate. We know in the live face-to-face world, as great as it is, if you're doing an event in, say, Phoenix, Arizona, you're probably going to be pretty limited in terms of how many account-based marketing accounts you're able to get to a specific event in a city like Phoenix. You're going to be much more limited than if you were be able to do a virtual event, obviously without having the geo boundaries at all. So I think that is one of the biggest advantages, which is the ability to get more targeted contacts and accounts in the same room at the same time, which is very meaningful. And it's going to be really interesting once we go back to have the option of in-person events, how the mindset changes and how hybrid will play in terms of extending events, even live face-to-face events, to also include a virtual component, just because you want to be able to include these really important accounts. But I wanted to continue with ABM and go through the panel again. And this time I'm just going to let people speak up who want to answer this question, which is specifically, how is virtual supporting ABM?
I think it's interesting, and this kind of adds on to some of what Samantha was saying about large events and about being able to provide in language events. So it's great that we no longer have regional boundaries because we're vertical, but we've found we do need some boundaries. It may not be regional now, but what are the boundaries? Because we started doing that. And there is a place for that. We do large events. Everyone can come. We do one in EMEA for all of EMEA, one in the US for all of the US. Those are great. But when we're talking about ABM, we then looked at, okay, yeah, great, we don't have boundaries, but let's put up some boundaries. Let's still do an event maybe for the East Coast, but let's do it for financial services on the East Coast. So maybe we do it by vertical. We do kind of gaming for the West Coast, manufacturing centrally. So a lot of what we're doing is targeting vertically. I have found that people are definitely more interactive when they're with their peers. So that's really worked well for us. We also find that in EMEA, I don't know if anyone's doing EMEA events, but we have found that doing French and German language events as opposed to English for the whole region has really been impactful. I mean, that works for them. That's how they really feel that in that face-to-face in-person experience that they're looking for. So the in-language, and even still just doing it by region to be in the right time zone if you don't really target vertically. So we have found that, yes, it's great we have boundaries, but let's put some boundaries up anyway, I think is the way I would put it.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that, Melissa. I think it's a great point, and Samantha, you touched on this as well. What we've seen that also works from an ABM perspective is even getting, very hyper-focused on a particular account. So maybe we, are currently in the finance function, but we really want to start breaking into sales and supply chain. So we can host a very unique, content curated roundtable discussion to bring together our existing customers within that account, as well as their peers in the other functions, but then follow that with some type of unique experience. So whether it's a wine tasting or a cooking experience, we've brought in celebrities to do a fun meet and greet if it ties in with their particular industry. And I think that that's really helped to, again, resonate, because you're able to hyper focus and really help your sales team break into that account and expand across those functions.
Really great point, Sarah. Anyone else want to chime in on ABM?
I'll just add that I think if you have any ABM program, it kind of has to be an element of what you do, right? You have to find ways to engage across multiple channels. And one of the things that have been very successful I've seen is sort of the integration of tactile and the virtual experience. So sending a physical something to someone so that they have something to touch and feel and sit there. But I also think there's an opportunity, again, to make that personal connection. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll send a video introduction from the facilitator or for someone who's speaking or an MC just to say hi, right? It ups the factor of that personal connection. And we make phone calls, right, to confirm people are going to be attending, not just robocalls or sending out an email or rely on a calendar invite. Because again, we're trying to connect people together to have a shared experience. And these virtual events allow us to do that in an ABM model. And without it, we're missing a leg in the stool, right? We're lopsided if we don't have this mechanism in this way. So I agree with all the folks that have spoken before me that this is an instrumental part of an ABM program.
Thank you, Samantha. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is related to ABM, which is how are we maximizing the value of virtual events to our sales teams? I can tell you that working with about 35 clients over the past year with virtual events, that one of the biggest challenges has been to convince our client sales teams to fully participate in these virtual events and to also at the same time create formats that allows for that participation. We all know salespeople by nature love to be face-to-face. They're very comfortable in venues, in networking, and sitting at a round table with 7 prospects, breaking bread, sharing business cards, getting to know people. How do you do that virtually? What's working for you? And again, I'll open this up to anyone. I
just lived this, both initially very painfully. So I'll jump in with it a little bit. It's a different skill. Moderating and building rapport and making a group comfortable on the virtual experience is not the same as what a salesperson is used to doing in person. And so what we have done is actually team them with a host who is typically someone on the marketing side who has a different kind of skill set from the salesperson, and they actually host it, and the salesperson is participating as a participant in the session. And it took a little pressure off of them to do some of the things that were uncomfortable. My hope is over time that they'll model it and that we can sort of extract the marketing person out of it. But frankly, it's good for the marketing people because we don't get in front of customers nearly as often as salespeople do or buyers. And so it's kind of been a bonus for marketers to be building rapport with customers that we might want to call on for a customer story later or a research interview question, and salespeople to have some pressure off so they can just kind of show who they are without feeling this role. So some salespeople are better at it than others, but our success has come in taking the pressure off of them in an area they were not natural at and that they didn't know how to do, frankly.
I think for me, setting expectations with the salespeople that this is not a webinar, right?
Yes.
Like, don't just follow up the leads later if you feel like it, because they may be good or not. Treat this like you were there, in-person event. Say, hey, did you hear when this person said this? Or I heard you say this. Like, use it to your advantage. Use it as a reason to call. And once again, like, this is not just a webinar. So I even did like trainings with my salespeople before, like, this is what you should be doing before, during, and after, which is totally different than going and sitting at a webinar.
Yeah, that's a good point. I actually that's a good reminder. I really need to do that kind of training for the sales team, but it is true. I agree with Samantha that we actually don't really have our salespeople participate so much on the event. What's really changed is the before and the after. So before, they're much more involved. We are still ultimately building a relationship for them. We want them to build the relationship. So it's the before factor of you know, personal invitations from them, not from marketing. We also get them involved. We also have added, like Samantha said, added a direct mail vendor this year to do gifting, and we have the gifts come from the salesperson. And then, like Sarah said, the follow-up after is different, and it's more personal. And you know, in some cases, maybe the gift comes then. And so, yeah, so it's more the before and after for us than the actual event changing the sales from the sales side.
And I definitely agree with you, Melissa. I think to your point around the gifting, and this kind of ties back to one of those great things about being virtual is when folks are cameras on, you get a glimpse a little bit into their personal life, or is they're just kind of doing their general, oh, I have a newborn, so if you hear something crying, I might have to go, or my dog or my cat. And so we also say to our sales teams, like, hey, you've got a little bit of insight. There are tons of great platforms out there. We have one that we use that they can send e-gift cards. They can send, you know, folks just all kinds of great experiences. So maybe they found out someone's into yoga. They can send them a 30-day, you know, virtual yoga class. But what it does is it allows them to be super tailored and customized in their follow-up. That's not just a business discussion, but more of a, hey, you know, congratulations that it's your 10-year work anniversary. Here's a gift card from 1-800-Flowers, treat yourself, or whatever it might be. But I think that the e-gifting has been another really unique piece that sales can use to make that personal touch.
Sarah, I will pick up on what you said because I couldn't agree more about a personal touch, and that comes really before a call. I think preparation and research is more critical than ever because the old adage is true. Everybody loves to buy, no one likes to be sold. And when you personalize something after you have a valuable business meeting, and I'll give an example. A couple of weeks ago, I was on a call with a gentleman, and there's plenty of research tools out there. All we have to do is look at social media. And I found out from this gentleman's profile that when he was in college, he did a production of a different kind of Phantom of the Opera, is the way that he had listed it. So we have a 30-minute meeting, and at the end of the meeting or the call, he says, hey, do you guys have any other questions for me? And I simply said, and it was appropriate, it wouldn't sound weird or stalking, but I simply said, can you please tell me what a different twist on Phantom of the Opera is? And he hesitated and said, oh my gosh, how do you know that? And he got this big smile on his face. And he told me the story, but you could tell the impact that it makes on people that you cared enough to really look into not only what it is that they may value business-wise, but you cared enough about them as a person when appropriate and not looking shady, of course. But that research is just invaluable.
You know, from our perspective at BDI, I'm going to kind of take issue with a couple of the panelists who took some pressure off the salespeople when it comes to virtual events. And I'm actually going to argue that what Sarah mentioned with the proper training and preparation, and Dane, you also said this too, virtual events can really be an incredible tool for salespeople, really for two reasons. Number one, data. We get a tremendous amount of data through virtual events that we don't get with face-to-face events, especially if we're using things like chat like we are here. The ability for salespeople to pay attention to chat, to even send private chats if someone is asking a question that might be related to your product or service, to be able to provide a link right in the middle of that event in a private message to an attendee is absolutely appropriate. You can actually strike a whole conversation and have a private conversation with chat in the middle of an event. You know, as long as you're not being too salesy or too pushy and it's actually desired from the attendee. Using polling data is another one. By listening and seeing how people are answering questions gives you the data that you need to respond sometimes. The second point I'm going to make is the format, and that is sort of what other people said about virtual events not being typical webinars, which we all know are one-directional content being pushed out at you with very limited opportunity for engagement and interaction. Virtual events like the one we're doing here today that really encourages people to participate really sets an opportunity through things like breakout rooms, which we as you've seen, we've done. Breakout rooms are the equivalent of the table of 8 people at a private restaurant where you have one salesperson and say 7 prospects, and maybe it's before the panel starts and they're getting to know each other. So by creating space in our formats, in our agendas, and making sure that the sales folks are prepped properly and that there's some strategic thought that goes into who's sitting in whose breakout session, making sure that target accounts that are assigned to certain salespeople are actually assigned to them, and that salesperson can expect to meet people from their target accounts in that breakout session. And then finally, by providing them with the training and the tools so that they can understand how to behave, how to moderate, all are essential ingredients for really enabling salespeople to be successful with virtual events.
So Steve, just to want to comment on your comment, I actually think we said the same thing. So mostly. So I actually think by having someone else play host, the salesperson is able to do those more personal conversations. So when I said take the pressure off the salesperson, I'm specifically talking about sort of owning MC function and letting them get in and answer chats and build the rapport and do those things. So that has been, I think that distinction's important because frankly, it lets a salesperson do what they really want. And that is to only focus on the people on the call that matter to their territory. And as much as we want them to be good corporate citizens and they, in theory, want to, they always hone in on the people that they are going to have the long-term relationship with. And so rather than try and force it, I have found that teaming model works, but you're absolutely spot on that they should be having personalized engagement. We should be collecting information and sharing with them. Whether they're there or not, a lot of these systems capture that information and share it afterwards, but it's hugely valuable, right, for them to be engaged in a way that aligns with what they also want.
Thank you, Samantha.
Yeah, I agree. And I didn't mean to imply that they're not there. We have salespeople on our virtual events. They just don't have a role in the agenda.
Okay. Any other thoughts about engaging sales teams? And this could be either from the panel or any of the attendees.
Can I ask a question, Steve? I know you're probably like, shut up, Samantha. I didn't ask you to ask questions, but has anybody had, I'm going to ask it anyways. Has anybody had good experience with virtual trade shows? Because I am like, 4,000 at this point. They're completely been useless to me, but I'm dying to find out if someone else has had a better experience.
If you want a list of leads, sure.
Yeah, it's like buying a list. Yeah.
Like buying a list.
Okay.
I think that's right. Yeah, I attended one with a software vendor or manufacturer, and they had all of the main tent sessions of speakers, but then they had this virtual exhibit floor that people were supposed to then come and get into breakout rooms to come see them. And my experience is we had, anywhere from 3 to 5 people attending those for hours at a time, and maybe one person would come by. So I find them, like you said, Samantha, largely useless.
Well, I'm glad to hear that because I think that is the contrast to this, right? And so the reason I raise it is sometimes we're asked to sort of cost justify. The more intimate events aren't necessarily low cost, right? And people try and compare it to something where they feel like you've got an audience of 300 or 5,000, but in reality, nobody's coming by your booth, right? So thank you for letting me digress a little bit.
No, I think very valid question. I'm going to move on to the next question, which a lot of us touched on already, which is how do you make virtual events more interactive and more engaging to the attendees? How do you maximize attendee experience with virtual events?
Steve, can I jump in here for a second? To me, I just was going to say is exactly what Samantha just did. So thank you. And I know Steve feels the same way. It's empowering attendees and panelists to feel comfortable sharing. Now, not everyone's going to feel comfortable doing so, of course, but it's creating that sort of environment that would empower those who can do that. So I just had to say that.
Thank you, Jess. I absolutely agree. How do we make things more engaging?
I think the answer to getting more people to engage and participate is wine.
Wine.
And I'm so serious. We did a handful of wine events where it had all the elements that a lot of us have spoke about, right? Like we sent them something physical before So they got their box of wine, which also our participation rate for that, like registration to actual participation, was like well over 90%, because we sent them a huge thing of wine. I think they felt bad and they're like, wow, now I got to participate. This is worth a couple $100. So that was the first thing. And then the format that we would do it in is wine tasting first, like wouldn't even mention any thought leadership things. Wine tasting, 45 minutes. Everybody's at least one glass deep. And then we went into breakout rooms. And people were more than happy to talk. And I honestly think it's because they were loose, they were having a good time. They had a good time during the wine tasting. Everyone already had that connection going. And then they were willing to kind of spill the beans after that. But just in general, like a really nice format to follow that is kind of engaging. Like they feel like they're getting something from it. We weren't asking them a bunch of questions to start with. That was kind of towards the end. But also I think people felt real good.
I completely agree with Sarah. And I think back to, Steve, you mentioned this, typically this event even would be at a nice restaurant. We probably all would have had a glass of wine when we walked in, or a beverage of choice. And then, you do your networking, you sit down, and then you're engaging in conversation. And so I agree, having something that's an icebreaker, whether it's alcohol or if it's something that the entire group is into, so cooking, or if you tie it around a particular sport or something that's happening, it is that nice icebreaker because everyone's there on kind of a level playing field. But I definitely agree that the wine helps. I've also noticed too, for some of our more intimate events where we've done those types of experiences, we encourage our clients to have either a significant other or their family members joining in. And we've found that that also increases their engagement and interaction. And then lastly, to Sarah's point, I think too, when they have something, whether it's wine or a cooking kit and it's sitting on their kitchen counter, for a few days leading up to the event, they feel more invested. And so we've seen our attrition rates are next to nothing at this point. Folks are really committed to attending and participating in that program.
We've added to that as well, Sarah, a game usually up front is an icebreaker. So bring your favorite beverage to the call, whether we send it to you or you just want to do it on your own in case we do these internally. But then we'll set up like a Kahoot game of maybe 5, 6, 7 questions to get everybody engaged and having fun, laughing at the questions and seeing who a winner is. So a little competition up front to go with whatever the beverage of choice is, as you put it.
I would just add to that, for those events that don't involve alcohol, I also just find that putting like-minded people together. So I mentioned before, like if you do financial services, if everyone's in financial services, I've just noticed that they're more interactive events. Also similar titles, like we sell a lot to creative directors. And when all the creative directors or brand owners get together, they're more interactive. They have such common challenges. Even look at this group, we have common challenges. That's why we're much more interactive. So I think, going back to what we were saying about how great it is that we can be really broad about things, I do think that people are much more interactive if they have commonality.
I think that you guys have all mentioned really, I totally spot on agree. One little thing that I've also found is an important element is just sort of the acknowledgement that I don't care if it's messy. I don't care if somebody walks by, like just taking the pressure off people. And even though we're all so used to this, like when you're in a networking event and you're with your peers, I think we still sometimes put that hat on of I've got to dress a certain way. My hair has to be done. I'm wearing makeup and a scarf today. And I assure you, I haven't done that the rest of this week, right? And those who did the prep call with me at the lake saw what I've been, right? But I think just giving people permission to have their partner or someone that lives with them join in just automatically eases people, and they're more likely to share their stories and participate. And right, and it's just being a good host like we would anywhere else.
Yeah. Also with the ability to move around, some of the about 4 or 5 months into the Zoom virtual world, I got tired of just sitting there looking at a screen. So even when I was presenting, I began to put my laptop up on top of a box on top of my desk so that I could stand and I could move around, and it felt more natural, but kept the energy pretty high.
One other thing that I'll just mention, because Melissa, you touched on this, is around the like-mindedness. And so one of the things that we have found to be really successful is we will pick a major sporting event that's happening, and we will have someone that has either professionally played that sport or someone who's been very involved. And what you end up getting is this great virtual meet and greet that folks might not be able to do, even if they were at the specific tournaments, but they're able to engage in that live audience Q&A. We've done it with professional golfers where I've had C-level execs say, you were my childhood idol. You were the whole reason why I went on to play, you know, this sport in college, or even, you know, and professionally as well. And so I think that's been a really great way to, again, build that network and that community amongst your client base, because they're all getting to figure out like, hey, we have this in common. It's that like-mindedness that I think really resonates well.
Just wanted to, again, check in with the rest of the audience to see if anyone else has any thoughts or things they want to contribute, or even questions that they want to ask the panel about the topics that we've covered, whether it's about how to increase interactivity and engagement, overall advantages of virtual, how to support your ABM strategies. Would love to hear from additional folks in the audience.
I have a couple of thoughts. One, we're pretty driven by target accounts, by account-based marketing. When we do an event that's kind of broader, we, you know, we invite everyone, but what we really measure is how many of our target accounts attended. So it's like it's a subset of the overall attendee list, but it's the subset that where our goals are. We're, you know, as most marketers now, largely driven by revenue. So we've actually had VIP events this year where we actually invited only accounts with open opportunities, and you know, and had VIP events specific for, you know, potential new customers. We've also done VIP events for customers who have a renewal in the next 6 months. So they're coming up for renewal. We want to, you know, talk a little bit more about the product, or maybe we talk about the roadmap with them. So, you know, by doing VIP types of events, you can really get specific with your goals as far as, you know, sourcing revenue, creating opportunities, speeding up the conversion rates. And those are kind of our goals, are based more on revenue. So it's actually easier to do that because you can segment your attendee list so nicely that way. So that's just some ideas that things we've done.
I think another thing is, so I work for a smaller company, and I'm one of 3 marketing people in the company, and we're just ramping up like true marketing. And so I have, you know, my founder every day going, how many people are signed up for the webinar? I'm like, that's not the right question, but sure, I'll tell you. And I think it's really hard for certain teams to understand, like, well, we had 400 people sign up for that webinar. How come we only have 40 for this one? And just like you were saying, Melissa, like it's the list, it's who we invited. And I think it's also important to say, like, for a webinar, it's okay if only 3 people come because they don't know they're the only 3 people that are there. But for a VIP event, we may want to actually have more people and bodies in the room to make it look a little better, regardless of who they are, even if they're not in our target list, right? They're on the B list, they're on the C list, but we still have those 8 people in there. But yeah, for like this specific webinar, I don't have to have 1,000 people in there to make it look good. It looks good to you because you just like the number that I just gave you, but is it actually translating anything? So for me, ROI is really where it's at. And I'll always tell them, I'm like, yeah, for the cost of this, if we get 1 deal signed, it was worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's what I always try to go back to and say, like, based on our ASP and blah, 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 like, we just have to sign 5 people out of this. So if 50 people came, doesn't really matter because we just need 5 to make it worth it.
With the size of our sales cycles there, which could be 4 to 6 months on our opportunities or deals, you're exactly right in measuring ROI. We do a near-term, mid-term, and long-term ROI. The near term is how many of those people that attended want some follow-up action, another meeting, they actually have an idea for a solution. midterm is when we sign that first deal. And that's when the event begins to pay for itself and be worth the investment of time that we put into it. And then long term is not only signing the first deal, but the follow-on 2 or 3 or 4 deals and turning that particular opportunity into a longer term client. So we measure it that way. And I'm glad to hear that you guys do as well, because back to the numbers, Steve, I don't know if you had mentioned this or someone else on the panel did, but measuring just by attendees is really a fool's game, because we invited at a recent webinar we did earlier this month, we invited over 500 people. And I started noticing that the ones we were inviting were cousins and brother-in-laws and just people to pack the audience. They weren't really people that were going to be stakeholders or buyers of our services. And so out of that 500 plus invitation list, we had 75 attend. And out of the 75, I'd be willing to bet that only 25 were really people interested and able to invest in our services.
I love all these examples, and I think they're spot on. One other way that we've looked at it is oftentimes we're inviting people to these sessions that we actually don't know that contact at that event very well, or they haven't met with us a long time and they've gone quiet, or we know they're not ready for a sales conversation. So if we have an ABM strategy and we're looking at surrounding these accounts, does this allow us to engage a group of people that weren't ready to engage with us in other ways? And typically in any time we've done an event like that, we've got some people that we know and love, and this is a way to progress our relationship with them. So we track pipeline opportunity over time, but also it gets us in front of people in a way that's difficult to do through other mechanisms, because we're inviting them to something they're more likely to attend. So it's a little softer, but that's also been a metric that the sales team loves, right? Because they love it when we are spending an hour or an hour and a half with someone that they couldn't get the time of day with, right? Any other way.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I'll add to that is one of the big topics of conversation we have within our team is that every program we run can have its own unique metrics and KPIs based on how we are setting that program up. So if it's customers only, and we're using that as, Melissa, to your point, maybe it's focused around renewals, or maybe it's focused on building levels at the C-suite within accounts that we're trying to break into. And I think there's always the question around, quantity over quality, but I think fundamentally it goes back to how are we setting up this program, and what do we want those metrics to look like? And then once you have those identified, you can then be able to set those goals and not have it just to be around registrations, but is it around MQLs? Is it around SQLs? Is it about, shortening the opportunity stages and closing those deals faster? And so I think that's also where we can partner really closely with sales as we're building these programs out to say, hey, what's going to make the difference for you? What's going to move the needle? Where should we focus?
I have some thoughts on that. When before Quartzy, I worked at Cornerstone On Demand, and we had a huge sales team. And the answer is so much hand-holding. I wrote all of their email templates for reaching out after events, before, during, and after events. They didn't have to use them, but it was recommended. Also would put touches in place using Sendozo. If any of you use that amazing tool, look it up if you haven't heard of it. I call people out. So I'll run activity reports in Salesforce and say, I'll first do it in a nice way, like, hey, these people have engaged with the people that went to this event. Great job. Thank you so much. And then I'll start CCing their manager, like, hey, haven't seen you reach out to any of these people. And I'm still liked. So, I haven't made anyone too upset yet, but I definitely reach out to people and say, like, hey, is there a reason you're not reaching out to this person? Because I just want to make sure, because if they don't reach out to them, then the work that I did is just for nothing. So I want to make sure my program's successful and that my sales team is successful too. But holding hands.
Amen, Sarah. You are so spot on. I also just want to point out that it depends on what the event is. An immediate follow-up by sales isn't always the next step. And certainly when we're doing things like our customer appreciation or congratulating a big prospect on some milestone, or even sometimes prospecting, the whole point is to create this connection, this emotional and this shared interest connection. And if we immediately go into the same kind of tactics and follow up as we do with a web seminar, we've kind of failed at that. So it's, we try really hard to find that right balance between here's how you should follow up and the timing, and trying to get them to do personalized outreach, putting them into nurture programs post-event that marketing is doing. And again, it depends a little bit about what the actual activity an event is, but we rarely think of an event as its own thing independent of other things. It's usually part of email nurture or direct mail, ongoing cadence with the tele-follow-up, and we try to use it as a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I agree with that. It really depends on the event. We also tend to use our speakers or our host as well, because, right after the event, you just went, and particularly in branding and creative, it is a creative and somewhat emotional topic sometimes. So sometimes it's nice to have them actually hear from the creative, our studio of designers, or from whoever hosted the event, our brand owner, instead of just like, oh, you just attended this lovely event, now here's sales. So we tend to use some of the speakers, and like Samantha said, if it is a specific event for opportunity or for renewal, we do put that on the sales team. For larger events like webinars, we do take that on more on the marketing side, and tend to segment the list. If it is a target account, that kind of has one process. If it is not a target account, it has a different process. So yeah, I would take it on a case-by-case basis, really. But don't forget your presenters, don't forget your guest speakers, and make them part of the follow-up.
Yeah, I completely agree. Absolutely, Melissa and Samantha, with both of what you said. And then Sarah, to also add on, in terms of hand-holding, one of the things that I think is a really great aspect in the virtual world that we're living in is that we literally have the ability to track audience input and feedback through live chats, through Q&A, polling, how engaged and interactive they are, if they attended a virtual session for 5 minutes or the full hour. We have all of that readily accessible. So to Sarah's point, that hand-holding, I think, also includes those insights, and then ensuring that the sales team is going back, they're listening to replays, they're reading through all the information. So it's not just this blanketed follow-up, it's curated strategically to that person.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in and mention one thing, kind of, Sarah, what you were mentioning in terms of like the sales engagement. So from my perspective, it's unique because we work with so many different logos and different teams, and we see the way that the sales folks engage. And the best scenario that I've seen is when we kick off a program, there's usually, when we have that kickoff call, sometimes the marketers will invite the sales reps at the very beginning to say, hey, this is an agency that we're bringing in. They're going to work with us. This is the goal, the objective, etc. So we know that the target account list that they give us as well is, top notch. And then we engage them, obviously, just before the event, just powwow. This is who's registered, do your homework. Make sure you show up at this time, and video on, this is the format, etc. And then we also book at least a 15-minute debrief, sometimes just like an hour after the event ends, so everything is fresh in their minds. And we've even gone through, a good debrief is where we screen share and we show them literally contact by contact. And then typically for sales reps that are physically attending the events that we organize for our clients, they're the ones doing the follow-up. So we'll literally have kind of like an assignment strategy session. And then from there, that's where we pass that baton, because that follow-up is, as we all know here, is super critical when it's like fresh. So just wanted to share that, because I think blocking off that hour for follow-up the day after the event, blocking that debrief, after the event ends, day of, and even the before, having all that kind of a preset cadence is really critical. So just wanted to share that.
I think a related topic, which is a question I haven't gotten to yet, which is something that someone brought up earlier before, which is the digital content opportunity with virtual. When we talk about follow-up, one of the greatest things about virtual is that you can very easily get the recording for the entire event. And with some skilled assistance from editors, you can really create very nice branded bite-sized pieces of video content that you can use in a lot of different ways. Think about everyone who registers but didn't show up, who showed interest originally, or for those who weren't even able to RSVP, or they gave you a no RSVP because they had a conflict that day, but they're interested in the topic. It's never been easier to share content with them. You know, now that we have these digital recordings, we're able to get them, access them easier than when they were live and face-to-face. Remember working with AV companies in live events and having, you know, multiple technicians and multiple cameras and all the stuff that goes into doing recording. Well, most of these virtual event platforms, Zoom included, just about everyone provides a raw recording that if you have some decent editors, you can really turn that into very polished, branded content, and you can include that in your follow-up. So I wanted to ask the panel, as well as any attendees, what kind of success have you had with digital video content now that it's easier to produce it?
That's a really good question, Steve. I will say two things. So first, I will say that not all the content that comes out is digital, but we find very valuable. These kinds of intimate forums of discussion make great follow-up blog posts, right?
Sure.
So one of the things we've done is create a blog post and then take snippets of the video and like embed it in there. So we're reusing a snippet, but we're also creating some other content that we're able to use. I find the snippet stuff super helpful for social outreach. It's been great for sales, one-to-one personalized follow-up. So for example, to say, hey, Jane was brilliant at our roundtable the other day. She talked about blah, 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 and they'll be sending it to someone else at Jane's company. So it makes Jane look good, which we love, but also maybe gets the attention of another contact at an organization that salesperson doesn't know as well, right? And so I won't say a lot of the sales team are very good at that. I'm not going to pretend that we've cracked the code on how to do that, but we're experimenting and we're starting to see pockets of success in reusing in some of those ways.
Fantastic.
Another one I wanted to point out this morning, I got one from loom.com. Has anyone gotten one from there?
No.
It was so cool. Instead of him attaching just a presentation and saying, let me know if you have any questions, he attached the presentation, but it was a video and he was really small in the corner of a PowerPoint presentation of him going through the presentation. And it was like a 4-minute video, but it was so much more engaging than me just like reading through his proposal. And he basically like avoided us having to have a meeting too. And I was able to forward that link to all sorts of people that didn't go to the original presentation. That one was really awesome. And I'm trying to think of great ways we can use that for follow-up with events and stuff.
Some of the things that we're doing at BDI with the digital content piece for our clients is as follows. So what we like to do is take the entire length of the panel discussion and audience Q&A and edit it accordingly, making sure we get rid of those awkward pauses and ums and ahs and all that stuff. We do brand it according to our clients' brand guidelines and colors and so on. But in addition to that, we deliver about 5 bite-sized pieces of content. It could be like top 5 takeaways in 5 minutes, you know. So in order to do that though, when you think about the editorial resources, you really need to think about 2 different categories. You've got the technical editors, which are really skilled at you know, the technical editing, making sure that they're able to, you know, add the branding and cut and paste things together and so on. But you also got the content editing, because you need to understand the context of, well, what are the most valuable pieces? So you need someone who actually understands the content itself and is able to analyze the entire conversation and say, what are the most important parts of that conversation that happened? What were the you know, what were the points that Dane made, that Samantha made, that really resonated? And so we really work with 2 different types of editors. One's content and the other is technical. And by working with those two together, that's how we're able to produce these deliverables. Often they tend to be anywhere from 1 to 7 minutes long, aside from the full length panel, because you really want bite-sized, snackable content. You want it for social media marketing, you want it for content marketing, digital marketing, etc. Those are some of the things that we're doing, with our clients at BDI when it comes to digital content. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I wanted to again pivot back to the audience to see if anyone has any questions, comments. We not only want to give you the opportunity to ask questions, but we also want to learn from you too. So if you've got experiences about some of the things we've been talking about, please share your success stories, your challenges, even your failures, because we can all learn from that.
We hit on one of the answers before up front, and it's just meticulous preparation. I will divide groups of people, maybe only by 5, and assign those to each one of our client account executives. And their role is to prepare a 1-page summary on each person that is coming, so that we have valuable facts and information, what's important to them, what are challenges that they may be facing. Just an exhaustive list that we know everything that we can and can be prepared as possible, and even anticipate what some of their questions may be. We do that in order to structure the most valuable session that we can, because my goal for every meeting and every session is to have the participants or the people that we meet with walk out and say, that was an excellent use of my time. I'm very glad I did that, versus, God, there went another hour and that was useless. So I think up front, it's just got to be research. It's got to be preparation and really aligning the message to what it is those participants need and want to hear.
One other comment just I would like to add to that. A lot of times, I think we as marketers, if we've hired a company to do recruitment for an event, for example, we don't want to send it, we don't want to drive our own people there, because we're paying them to do the recruitment for the event. And we don't want to confuse the ROI analysis on it, and we sort of hold back. But I think it's okay to let go. There are lots of ways that we can take into account that, and it doesn't take the pressure off the partner to do it. If it's a great event with the right panel or the right speaker or the right group of people coming together, and you've got people that you want to drive to it, it's worth the effort to figure out how to do that and keep it clean. And to work with your partner to do that, as opposed to say, well, we're not recruiting for that event, so we're not going to, even though it would be awesome for this group of people. And I know I've fallen into that trap many times, and I've seen lots of people do it. It's really common, but with these kind of virtual experiences, we can break that a little bit, I think. And because you can do custom URLs and things, we can work around who drove the traffic to it.
Okay, well, big thank you to our panelists, Sarah, Melissa, Samantha, another Sarah, and Dane. Really appreciate your participation, your preparation. Really learned a lot from all of you. Hopefully the rest of the audience did as well. I wanted to thank the audience too. It was really a lot of engagement. Really appreciate everyone's perspectives, questions, the very active chat. We do have future events, and I think my colleague Jessica is putting some links there. This is a series, so we have new topics and new speakers, so feel free to check it out. We'd love to have you back and continue the conversation, and really appreciate everyone's participation today. Stay safe, and we hope to see you again. Have a very nice afternoon.